few years ago, I got a phone call that made me cry for an hour as I walked home from a train station, and I was convinced would transform my life negatively for forever. And yet today, I hardly ever think about what that phone call was about. And the story that sits on top of that idea, that I will tell you in a minute, teaches us that all experiences, both positive and negative, are relative, and that soon enough everything goes back to normal, or at least it returns to a baseline which allows you to live your life just as happily as you were in the past, which means that no bad situation is truly bad because it's only temporary, and eventually things will be okay. And the story I need to tell you to demonstrate this point is a bit of a random one, and it requires some context. So let me fly through that as quickly as possible. A few years ago, my dad was diagnosed with Alzheimer's very young, at the age of, I think, 54. And of course, as you'd imagine, a family member getting a diagnosis like that turned your world upside down, because there are lots of things that you need to consider in the moment and lots that you know will change in the future. And things were relatively stable until one day I realized that my dad had been getting progressively worse and worse. He was struggling more and more in the house. His mind just didn't seem like a nice place for him to be at the time. Lots was going on. And so he and my mum went off to their GP, whilst I went off to London to see a Stormzy gig. And in the moment, although I knew things were quite bad, I kind of thought nothing of it, right? I had this exciting day that I was looking forward to. But in the back of my mind, I was very aware of the fact that 4 years since my dad was diagnosed, he was so keen to not move into a care home. And putting myself into his shoes, I can understand why, right? Because when he was still cognizant and able to think for himself, the idea of a grown adult who has been independent for the whole of their lives having to go into a care home in a environment which is not familiar and is not theirs, and have other people who they don't know do things for them, must have felt like an awful prospect. And so for years, I had tried to promise my dad in the most sincere way possible that we would do everything possible to make sure that he didn't need to move into a care home. And so that's the context that brings us back to the day when my parents had gone to see the doctor and I had gone to London. I get to London and I'm in the train station and I get a phone call from the person who was in charge of my dad's care at the time. And she said, look, we've spoken to the GP, we've spoken to some consultants and specialists, and because of everything that's going on with your dad right now, he simply isn't able to continue living in the community and getting the care that he needs, right? Living at home is an environment not built for somebody who was struggling as much as he was struggling. And so the fairest thing to do, the thing best for his care, the thing best for his welfare and his health would be for him to move into a care home. And they couldn't find a care home immediately. That's not how it works. But she said that we will bring him into a specialist hospital on the condition that he won't be discharged from that hospital back home. He'll be discharged from that hospital into a care home eventually. And so essentially what that phone call was saying is that this thing that I had promised for years and years and years, I couldn't live up to, I couldn't help with, I couldn't do anything to control. And that back at home was my dad, who the next day I would have to sit down and tell him that that very day, with no notice, with no warning, because of how unwell he was, he would have to leave the house, and that he would never ever go back to that house. Of course, I didn't explain it to him like that because that would have been needless, but in my head, I was very aware of that fact, right? When we walked out of that door that day, and my brother and I, my mum and my dad, took him to this hospital, and we stopped in KFC beforehand and got some food. I was very fucking aware that we were never going back there together as a family, right? And on the walk home from the train station that night, I was sober, by the way. I hadn't drank for years by that point, so it's not even like I was drunk and emotional. I was just very emotional. The walk home from the train station that night, which takes about 45 minutes, I cried so much because it felt like everything we had done up until that point had been in some way a waste if we couldn't help my dad achieve the one thing that he wanted, which was to not go into a care home. But B, it made me incredibly scared for the future, as if nothing would be the same ever again, because how could it? And so the next day, I prepared my dad with the news that he would be going into hospital, and then we'd look for the best way to support him. I tried to explain as much as he could understand at the time that this was for him and to get him the support that he knew he wanted and needed. And then I remember sitting in the kitchen with him, and he filled up this kettle. And to this day, like 6 years later, it makes me sad when I think about this, because he was filling up a kettle like he had done a million times before, which he would never use because he was never going to be back in the house again, right? And he put the kettle down, and I just felt this sense of helplessness in that moment. But then he went to the hospital, and they looked after him well. And of course, lockdowns happened in the middle, which threw a spanner in the works. But broadly speaking, he was happy there eventually. And then he went into a care home, and then another care home where he currently lives. And he's probably coming towards the end of his life now. But in the 6 or so years since that day, when I walked home from that train station crying, convinced that nothing would ever be the same again, convinced that nothing would ever be happy again, there have been lots of incredible happy moments, both with my dad, when he's had a good day, when we've gone to visit, or we've managed to pop out somewhere in the car, but also just in life generally, right? Because as real as the upset was that day, as much as I could physically feel how much it hurt, feel how much of a big deal it was, we as humans are incredibly resilient, and we have this plasticity to ourselves that in spite of how bad things might be in any given moment with whatever situation you might be going through right now, despite the fact that we have this near complete inability to see past the current thing, as if the current thing will always be the case and that we'll never move past it. Despite all of that, each of our lives is a rolling case study, is continuous proof that that's not true. Because each of us have gone through really big deals in life, whether it is losing a loved one or dealing with an illness, whether it is financial ruin or losing your job. In the moment when that thing happened, it felt all-consuming. In the moment when that thing happened, it felt like that is all you would ever know. And you can think back to that moment right now, probably. There have been those moments in your life where you thought you're not going to get past this, or that things will never be the same again. And yet look at you, look at your life, look at everything you've done since then. Look at all of the amazing moments you've had since then. Look at how much you have to look forward to right now since then. Difficult times are both relative and they are temporary. And each of us has the ability, as we've proven to ourselves endless times in the past, to rebound, to reset, and to adjust that baseline. And that doesn't mean that we don't feel bad about the things that once made us feel bad. That doesn't mean that we forget, or that we're somehow bad people, cold-hearted, careless people. It's none of those things. It's built into us to be able to be resilient. That's why we're still here. That's why we still do what we do. If there's one thing guaranteed in life, it's that terrible situations, which are not fair, which you do not deserve, which you did not ask for, are going to be thrown at you. And you're going to have to respond. And in the moment, you're going to feel unable to respond. You're going to feel like you're not the kind of person who can deal with that, or that things will never be the same again. But you have already proven to yourself endless times in life that things will be the same again, and that things will be okay again, because they're okay now. You've done it before. You can do it again. So if by some quirk of the universe you happen to have clicked on this video when you're going through something difficult, just know that it's going to be okay. And if you're watching this video whilst you're having a great time in life, just keep that idea in the back of your head. Not my idea, but your idea. The idea that you know you have been through difficult things before. And so next time one of those situations arises, yes, feel all of the feelings you need to feel, but feel them in the context of understanding that eventually one day, everything will be okay. Because eventually one day, everything will be okay.